Okay, in this discussion, I'd like to talk about the origin and nature of information. So let's talk about scientific definitions. They must be exact, have precise borders, be very clear. They must include all attributes which distinguish it from all other entities, and the definition must exclude everything that does not have even just one of these attributes. So here is an example definition. A firm, round fruit of a small tree, red, green, or yellow skin, white or yellow flesh, with a central core. So you see these 5 possibilities here. And the first one, the banana, is excluded because it is not round. The grapes are excluded because they're not from a tree, they're from a vine. The orange is the wrong color, and the plum does not have a core, it has a seed. So that leaves the apple, which does fully complete this definition and has everything included and needs not to exclude any particular part of that definition. Some examples of bad definitions are evolution, change over time. Well, just as you sit here listening to this presentation, you are changing over time. You are becoming older, but you are certainly not evolving. So this does not work. How about genetic change in a species over time? Well, the problem with this one is it is way too broad and vague. For example, here is the gray wolf, and the geneticists have determined that it has the genes that are also in the Chihuahua here. But this is not evolution, this is speciation with loss of information. So this does not work, because even as we breed various animals, whether it be dogs, pigeons, cows, horses, whatever, or plants such as corn, this is simply selecting for particular characteristics. This is artificial selection, we call it breeding. This is not evolution, it's just choosing portions of the information that are desired. So let's talk about what is information. And up to a few years ago, there has not been a universal definition that applies to both biological and technological systems. So we need to establish a definition that does fit all of these systems so that it can be universally applied. A current definition is information is everything, but this excludes nothing, so this is pretty useless. It is not a valid definition. Another one is coded systems with or without meaning. This model includes random assemblies of symbols that have no meaning. So, hello, how are you is converted into ru'ul, ua'i, which has no meaning, and therefore this is not universal. Well, let's talk about the characteristics of information so we can make a good definition which is applicable in all situations. So let's talk about code, the first characteristic of information, and we have various examples of code such as hieroglyphics, computer codes, Armenian, Georgian, or Ukrainian alphabets. And so you see here hieroglyphics, computer code, the Armenian alphabet, and I had fun learning this one when I taught in a seminary in Armenia. And then the Georgian alphabet here, which is quite unusual with all the circular features. And then, of course, the Ukrainian alphabet or the Russian alphabet or many other alphabets. So a code is a rule for converting letters, words, phrases, or symbols into something meaningful. So we use a code to convey meaning. One reason for coding is to enable communication. So I have a sentence here. It says, Juan, siéntese en mi coche rojo y maneje a la escuela. Now to you this probably sounds like something out of Star Wars. So this brings up the point of what is a second use for code. Well, that would be to hide information. And the meaning of this sentence actually is Ivan sadicie w moją krasную maszynę I jedźcie w szkolu. In the American military and the Marines in World War II, we made use of the Navajo language, and those Navajo men in the Marines used a code within the Navajo language in the Pacific theater of the war, and the Japanese were never ever able to crack that code, and so we were able to communicate over open radio frequencies without having the code broken and therefore having the military information intercepted. So we use code to convey information and also to hide information. As I said, code is used to convey meaning, and so we associate words with objects and actions, and so we have these examples here of chair, space shuttle, and computer, and so we can now associate these objects with these words, so the code conveys meaning. Meaning enables communication by associating words, phrases, or symbols to real objects. That's the second characteristic of information, which leads to the third, which is an expected action, an implicit or explicit request or command for a given performance or action. So the example here is go to the grocery store and buy some chocolate chips. So the expected action is the person goes to the grocery store and indeed purchase chocolate chips. So the code is used to convey the meaning to incite that expected action. This brings us to the fourth component of information, which is the intended purpose or result. And that's an anticipated outcome or goal that is achieved by the performance of the expected action, which is conveyed by the meaning given by the code. So in this case, it's go home and bake chocolate chip cookies, so that the intended result or purpose are these delicious cookies to eat. So in summary, code, meaning, expected action, and intended purpose are the four attributes of information. And so we have this sentence form of this, an encoded, symbolically represented message conveying expected action for an intended purpose. And this was developed initially by Dr. Werner Gitt in Germany at one of their higher levels of institutes for research in physics. And this was initially published in the book, In the Beginning Was Information. Now from this flows a couple laws of information. First law of information is that information cannot originate by random chance, that is, statistical processes. And this is certainly true in spite of the fact that evolutionists tell us that time plus chance equals information, but it actually does not. No matter how much time is given, how many chances, that does not generate information, in spite of the insistence that evolutionists demand that we have billions and billions of years so that evolution can possibly take place. Because the mantra of some evolutionists is that given enough time, the impossible becomes improbable, the improbable becomes possible, and then the possible finally occurs. Some of you may have seen the movie Independence Day, in which these aliens in these incredibly huge spaceships arrive at Earth and then make moves to take over the planet. And in the opening sequence of the movie, there is a person at this bank of monitors who is listening for a signal from out there. And we have been monitoring with radio telescopes for radio signals from out in space, with the thought that someday that we'll record a coded message by radio waves and then be able to intercept it and realize that there is alien life out there. So in the American Southwest, in western New Mexico, not far from the border with my state of Arizona, there is one of these arrays of these radio telescopes. And there are several others around various places on the Earth, such as Perth in Australia, and also Puerto Rico and some other locations as well. Well, I have this quotation here from a scientist in the SETI project, SETI, standing for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And this quote says, "Any day now we'll pick up a tiny coded signal, then we'll know for certain that there's intelligence out there, because coded information does not arise by chance. And I think this is so ironic, because here we have people who believe in evolution and are looking for life out there that has evolving by random chance events with no intelligence creating the code for life, yet they're saying that we know for certain that intelligence is there because coded information does not arise by chance. It's quite ironic. And so that second law of information is that information can only originate from an intelligent sender. And so we see here pictured a hard drive with a 500 gigabyte chip in it, and realize that DNA is at least 4 billion times more compact than what that chip can hold. And the amazing thing is DNA can reproduce itself, and it's much, much smaller. Well, here is a quote from Dr. Hubert Yockey, a secular scientist. He says, "The genetic information system is the software of life. And like the symbols in a computer, it is purely symbolic and independent of its environment. Of course, the genetic message, when expressed as a sequence of symbols, is non-material, but must be recorded in matter and energy." So in other words, information is recorded in matter, but information does not arise from matter itself, and it does not matter how the information is recorded. It can be in smoke signals, and so here you see this caption. It's from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and it says, "Your call is very important to us." Or engraved in stone, as we see here in these cuneiform tablets, printed in paper, as in the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America, or chalk on a board with the symbols representing molecules of lignin, which is a molecule that makes wood very, very hard, or placed on a hard disk of a computer, as in storing with electrons, or even encoded in the molecules of DNA. But no matter how the information is stored, it must arise from an intelligent source, not from matter itself. And so here, as I showed, here is the DNA and this 500 gigabyte chip. And just to make a point again that the information must arise from an intelligent source, not matter, and that the DNA is much more compact by 4 to 5 billion times than the chip. So the problem that is put before evolutionists is anyone who is not in agreement with this definition of information and these two laws of information must refute them and indicate the original origin information from purely material sources. And this problem for the evolutionists has never, ever been scientifically resolved. So then we come to the question, how do we unite proteins, DNA, and information? If you're an evolutionist, then you're stuck with a huge problem. And then you say, well, why is that? Well, it's because of this concept of what came first, the chicken or the egg. And the chicken's version of this classic question would be, what came first, the human baby or the adult? So we have the question of the chicken or the egg, the proteins, DNA, or RNA, the fruit bearing the seed, or the seed itself. If you're an evolutionist, then you have a real dilemma on your hands. And the word dilemma means being stuck on two horns at the same time and not being able to get off of either one of them. So that's why I chose this agave cactus here as a symbol of those two horns. And then the question is why? And the answer is this concept of irreducible complexity. Well, what's this? Well, Michael Behe, in his book, Darwin's Black Box, used the example of the mousetrap to symbolize a system that has so many components, and if you remove any one of those components, it ceases to function. And so we see here that the hammer, the hold-down bar, spring, catch, and platform are all indispensable portions of this mechanism, this mousetrap. The cheese can be removed and it will still function, maybe not as frequently, but it will still function. But remove any one of those 5 components and the thing simply becomes a bunch of junk laying around and cannot function. Well, it's the same situation here with the idea of the DNA and the RNA needing these transcription enzymes, proteins, in order to be able to make RNA. And the RNA and proteins for translation, in other words, going from the language of RNA, the bases, to the language of proteins, the amino acids, are all needed in order to be able to make proteins. So you need proteins to make proteins. And also enzymes, proteins, and DNA are needed in order to copy, replicate DNA. And so all of these things are needed at the same time from the very beginning in order to be able to have this system work at all. They are all necessary. This is an irreducibly complex system. But if we are a creationist, then you have the true answer, and the answer is all at the same time. And we have this answer in Genesis 1:11. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth." And it was so. So it is the chicken and the egg at the same time, all parts there together, fully functioning from the beginning. So if you can recognize the only intelligent source which can give the improbably great amount of information which DNA contains, along with its specificity of patterns, and as we have completed this sequence of the human genome, we're finding out how incredibly more complex it is than we ever dreamed of earlier, and that there are multiple layers of control in DNA. It simultaneously can create the DNA itself and the protein systems necessary to carry out the DNA's instructions, as well as the other components of the cell. Then logic leads you to this source in the following statement. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. So here it's quite clear in the book of John that Christ was there in the beginning, and that all things were made through him, and nothing can have come about by itself without the God of the Bible. Christians have the answer to these questions. So here's just a little summary review quiz with a little bit of extra information thrown in. So what is the genetic blueprint? And that would be DNA. Copying of the genetic code producing RNA is called transcription, and that literally means writing across. The RNA code uses uracil, which the DNA code does not use. It's a different letter of that alphabet. Messenger RNA must be matured. In other words, it has to be processed. It has to go through 3 steps of processing before it can be mature and transported out of the nucleus of the cell to be taken to ribosomes in the cytoplasm, where the manufacturing of proteins takes place. Transfer RNA is another kind of RNA that brings the amino acids used to synthesize proteins into the ribosomes so that they can be assembled, put together, and a protein be made. DNA dissolves in water, therefore life could not begin in the primordial soup. The body uses only right-handed sugars and left-handed amino acids. So we cannot use left-handed sugars, and we cannot use right-handed amino acids. So everything has to be of the right-handedness. Mutations, the supposed mechanism of evolution, do not add information to the genome. They are neutral or cause loss of information, causing disease or death. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So here Scripture is telling us that from what we see in nature, and looking at this example of information and DNA, that what we see in that God had to be the source of the information, had to be the creator of these systems. And because we can see this, that we know that we have to acknowledge that He is the creator, and that we have no excuse at all. It goes on in the next verse, because although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. The word futile refers to a leaky bucket. No matter how many times you take that bucket to the well and bring it back, that water isn't going to arrive where you want it because of the holes in the bucket. So it's absolutely useless attempt. And that's a good description of evolution. It is totally futile. And the people who believe in that deny God, and they do not glorify Him, and they are foolish. They may be very, very intelligent, but foolish for rejecting His truth and wisdom. In order to print out the DNA code for a bacteria, 2,000 8.5 by 11 inch pages are needed. For a human cell, 1,000,000 pages are needed. Information science has established that codes must be comprised of meaningful components, and that for the creation of a code, intelligence is absolutely necessary. In Psalm 147, great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit. His intelligence has no limit. Every day I'm in awe when I learn more things about how He has put this universe together. It is just simply overwhelming. He is truly the greatest. Matter by itself can never give rise to information. It can only store it. It is impossible to send or retrieve useful information by accidental processes. A code and decoder from the source of information is necessary. Anybody who deals with computers know that if accidental processes occur, it's garbage in, and therefore you get garbage out. Okay? Things don't happen by random chance. They all have to be very carefully programmed. Irreducible complexity means all components are necessary for function, and all at the same time. In Psalm 139, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. So deep down inside, we all know that we are made by God, but some of us are very good at denying that and going a different way. Only about 2 to 3% of all the DNA that we have in our genome in the human codes for the production of protein. So this begs the question, what does that remaining 97 or 98% of the DNA do? And it regulates everything that is going on in the development, growth, and maintenance of the organism. And a good portion of that DNA is also used for structural purposes as well, keeping everything organized. You can think of a library where some of the DNA are the walls, floors, and ceiling of the library. Some of the DNA are the shelves. Some of the DNA are the covers of the books. Some of it are the pages of the books. Some of it then is the code that's written on the pages of the books as well. And some of that DNA is regulating what has been produced in the way of proteins. We also have DNA repair and placement mechanisms which remove mutations, negating evolution. It's very interesting that we have at least 3 different enzyme systems or categories of enzyme systems that repair different types of mutations. And so then that brings up the question is, why would evolution develop these enzyme systems to repair mutations if evolution depends upon mutations for things to get more complex, move upward and onward, changing from one kind to a totally different kind? In 1 Corinthians, all flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of man, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds. So here again we have the truth in Scripture that these are distinct types of organisms and that they do not change from one into another. The Bible is not a science textbook. When it touches upon scientific topics, it is correct. And it's very good that it is not a science textbook, because we have multiple editions for each textbook, because we keep finding more and newer information. In order to keep those textbooks up to date, we have to make those new editions. But the truth in the Bible is constant and never changes. So this brings us to the music of life in the key of DNA. Thank you very much.